Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm a partner and the director of geopolitical analysis at Cognitive Investments. It's really nice to be back with you all. Thanks for bearing with us. We've got a rip-roaring cadence already going into the new year, but we will start, of course, by firing up the weekly chats with Rob about the intersection between geopolitics and markets. If we are a little rusty, I'm sure that you will forgive us. It's been literally months since Rob and I got together to talk about this, and there is a lot going on in the world. We were not our usual optimistic selves because there's not a lot optimistic going on in the world right now from either a markets perspective or from a geopolitics perspective. So sorry if you come to this looking for the silver lining, it's going to feel more like a Debbie Downer episode today. If you want to talk about what we do at CI or you want to be in touch with me, it's Jacob at cognitive.investments, and that's really all I've got for you. Cheers, hug the people you love, take care of each other, and I will see you out there. It's strange to be feeling a little nervous to be back on the podcast, Rob, because we did this, basically every Friday for all of last year, and I felt like we had gotten into a rhythm, but, life intervened. We haven't done it, I guess, since Thanksgiving. I didn't look back at our exact actual podcast, but I confess a little bit of nerves going into the return to the podcast. I want to make it like the most perfect podcast ever, which, of course, it won't be. It's nice to see you again.
And nerves, you're the expert. I think I totally forgot how to do this, so we're going to have to start from square one.
I don't know about that. I still get nervous before every speech and interview that I do, and usually people tell me that means that I'm not completely stupid. I thought the place to start with was actually to maybe look back at where we were 12 months ago and what people were talking about 12 months ago. And I don't know if you remember, around this time, 12 months ago, there were only a couple things going on. There was Brazil's Capitol riots, so people were talking about Brazil having their own January 6th moment. There was, God help us, the China spy balloons, and I saw some newsletter out there saying there are more spy balloons coming. Like, please light me on fire if we're going to do another spy balloon round. I can't do that. But we were also talking about the Chinese economy and the storm clouds on the horizon for the Chinese economy and why we were fairly pessimistic about that. And then I feel like market expectations, tell me what you remember about market expectations 12 months ago, because I sort of remember them as being mixed, but generally speaking, people thought maybe we had reached the end, that maybe we would start thinking about rate cuts in 2023, which of course did not happen. There were 4 rate hikes in 2023. No matter what Jerome did, inflation continued to surprise to the upside. And I know that you want to talk a little bit about inflation expectations right now, but it's sort of strange to feel like we're sort of in the same place that we were 12 months ago with at least U.S. market expectations. But why don't we just start there? Like, what is your recollection of like what we were talking about 12 months ago, and how is the current moment different from that moment?
I think from a markets perspective, 12 months ago, most people were focused on, we're going to have a significant recession because of the Fed's rate increases. They were focused on the consumer, and especially low-income consumers, cutting back on their spending in response to inflation and just their budgets getting crimped. And then they were focused on housing. So a lot of people expected housing to be very, very weak. All of the housing durables were getting crushed as sort of investment in people's homes started to roll over, and people were really concerned about that. So it's been a bit of a change, because in the end, after a terrible 2022, whether you were bonds or stocks, bonds were fine in 23 in the end, no great shakes either way. And the stock market, after, a rip your face off rally at the end of the year, I think surprised most people's expectations to the upside. So it's a little bit of a different scenario, because now the expectations are quite different from where we were a year ago.
And I know that your expectations are different than what the market expectations are, because you are who you are. So why do you think the market is I don't want to say wrong again, but why are you zigging while the market is zagging?
I think you got to break that down into bonds and risk assets. So before going into each of those individually, I think it's worth talking about just like the framework of how to think about all of this. Because we talk about this a lot. We talk about this notion of being in a system that is much more short-term and much more volatile than it has been historically, and also one where the different pieces are doing different things at different times, which historically was not the case. So China is doing one thing, the US is doing another thing, Europe is somewhere in between. They were usually much more synchronized before. So, we use this metaphor of the bathtub, and the waves are going up and down in the bathtub, and the boat is going back and forth and back and forth. I think that metaphor still holds, and it gives rise to, I think, kind of this recurring error that investors seem to be making in both directions, where they're taking a much more gradual view of everything and a much more sort of linear view, because now the expectations by markets are, oh, okay, well, inflation has decelerated. Clearly, I mean, everyone can look and see the data. So now we're just going to kind of hang in there, and growth didn't fall into a deep recession. It's sort of slowed, and that too is going to kind of hang in there. So we have this Goldilocks scenario, and somehow, even though everything has been totally bananas, back and forth, volatile, crazy in both directions over the last few years, like now we're just going to freeze, and everything's going to be great. And that's going to be creating the environment where the Fed is going to cut rates 3 or 4 times in the next 12 months. And I think that's just wrong. And I think just intuitively it's wrong, because what we've seen is that in an unstable system like we have, the system responds to the preconditions. So now inflation has come down a lot. It's really come off the boil. And what we're seeing is now consumer demand is starting to surprise to the upside again. So retail sales in November were surprisingly good. Holiday spending was surprisingly good. A lot of the indicators that you get on sort of travel demand and big ticket spending around the holidays has been surprisingly good. So housing is another thing. Interest rates, obviously, bond yields at the long end of the curve came down a lot in the last 2 months of the year. And already you're seeing a response from the housing market. So new housing starts in November were, I can't overstate how completely on fire they were. Shockingly strong. So the notion that everything is going to stand still all of a sudden, and you can just kind of take a snapshot of the current environment, and that's going to be pretty much what things look like 6 months from now or 9 months from now. We just don't live in a system like that anymore. And it's really hard to wrap your head around the fact that you need to imagine how things are going to be different 9 months from now in response to today. And that difference is going to be what drives stock and bond markets, not what the situation is today.
Not to mention the fact we're going into U.S. election season, which has all sorts of silliness associated with it. But you really do, if you look at polling data, and let's assume that it's going to be Biden and Trump, because that's what looks most likely today. I mean, you have this strange juxtaposition where people don't really trust Biden to run the economy, even though a lot of those headline indicators are looking better than they were 12 months ago. And you have Trump, who has all of these different moral hazards, and has he done this? And he's, however many, I've lost count of the number of indictments, and will he be on the ballot and things like that. But still people broadly thinking, oh, but he's good at the economy. Like things were good under Trump, and this sort of clash back and forth. And I do think, where we end with U.S. elections and how we wend our way through there is probably going to affect the U.S. economy in general. Some personal anecdotes. I mean, I'm in downtown Atlanta just for 24 hours to meet with some clients. When I flew here yesterday, absolutely packed. Now, part of that was because the Sugar Bowl was in New Orleans, and all the Washington fans with all of their regalia were leaving. But the clear pre-check plus line was to the elevators. If you know the New Orleans airport, you'll know what that means. It was absolutely mind-boggling. I almost missed my flight because I usually budget X number of minutes to get through the lines, and I was like, what is going on? But even here in Atlanta, I mean, the hotel that I'm in downtown Atlanta on a random Wednesday evening on January 3rd, completely packed. No rooms available for anybody else. Like the lobby has been packed, whether it's morning, day, or night. Everybody's kind of out and about. So all the prognostications of doom and gloom throughout all of last year, I was saying every time I was on the road, I was saying, like, There's no empty seats on the planes. There's no, I can't even get into restaurants, even bad restaurants like you can't get into. You need reservations and things like that. So I guess there's something, I don't know, like people have continually missed what the U.S. consumer can do. I wanted to touch on inflation though, because I don't know, I look at the inflation data and it doesn't necessarily look that good to me. I mean, we're up 3.1% in terms of a 12-month percentage change. So we're up 3% from 12 months ago, which was already up quite a bit. And the only real reason that we're up as little as we are is because energy is really still down. Energy is over 5% less than it was 12 months ago. And you've got crude hanging out somewhere between 70 and 80. We got stopped out on natural gas. Maybe we'll re-engage there shortly. But natural gas prices are super low relative to where they have been sort of for the last couple of decades. And, you know, the big geopolitical issue we're going to probably pivot to here in a second in more depth, what's going on with the Red Sea, what's going on in the Persian Gulf, what that means for crude in general, before we even get into the weather in Europe this winter. I mean, the complacency in energy markets and the idea that we're going to continue with crude hanging out at 70 a barrel, I mean, I wouldn't put my name to that sort of prediction. And if you had an uptick in energy prices, suddenly we're talking about inflation again. So I don't know. For me, the inflation data does not look unambiguously good. In some ways, it looks sort of lucky that you talked about Goldilocks. We got that warm winter in Europe last year, and you got a little more oil supply than you were thinking about on global markets. And the Middle East war didn't happen in October and November. It might still happen soon, and that sort of concerns me there. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, there's a few big factors here. I guess at the high level, I agree with your instinct because inflation has come down. There have been a lot of lucky things contributing to that. Also just, base effects. You anniversary changes that are already high and you get a natural deceleration. But the thing to remember is behind that slowdown in inflation and where are we starting from today has been a significant cyclical decline. Like China has been very, very weak growth for the last 12 months. Europe has been terrible in terms of, durable goods is what I mean. You've had one of the biggest freight market recessions in the history of trucks. I mean, going back 30, 40 years, the deflation that you've seen in freight after the incredible boom period during COVID has been extraordinary. And if that sounds boring, it's worth remembering freight is one of the most important components of all consumer inflation. And that's been a huge tailwind for all of these consumer companies. And this is where actually doing a lot of bottom-up work like we do and not just looking at these aggregate numbers is so helpful, because if you look at what consumer companies are talking about, like take Darden Restaurant, they have the Olive Garden. So the Olive Garden has not raised prices for the last 9 or 12 months. They raised prices a lot a year ago. And what's happened in the interim is the cost of food has absolutely collapsed in the last 12 months, with food prices like we've discussed from a geopolitical standpoint. There's our wheat trade getting stopped out, because wheat has declined, corn has declined, soybeans, protein, everything. So they've been sitting pretty because their margins have looked quite good because they've been benefiting from the price increase that they put into place a year ago. And in the interim, their costs have gone down. So their margins are expanding. Not
to mention the fact that everybody's on Ozempic now. So those bottomless breadstick pits at Olive Garden probably doing better for the Olive Garden. Although the people taking Ozempic are probably not at the Olive Garden. Anyway, couldn't resist.
Well, there's a lot of street analysts, this has been the topic du jour of the last 6 months of who is going to be hurt by Ozempic. Everyone from Nestle to I don't even know, the gym companies. But yeah, so the Olive Garden is an example of one of these companies. So not only do you have margins and profitability that's artificially inflated, because now food prices are starting to anniversary the decline. They're not going down on a year-over-year basis anymore, and they could very well go back up. And And then the other and much bigger one, and the same goes for energy, food, all of that has been declining. And that flows through into the price setting behavior of the consumer companies that make up the core, so to speak, index. But the big thing has been freight. So freight has been in a torrid downturn. But if you look, it's been improving throughout the whole second half of 2023. And sometime during the summer, you could see, because one of the things we look at is intermodal volumes. So intermodal, when you see a train and it has the containers on it that they took directly from the ship and plopped down on the train.
Yes, you can.
Those are intermodal containers.
You can literally hear them plopping them down in the port at New Orleans from my house at all hours of the day.
Yeah, exactly. So you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
So intermodal volumes, sometime over the summer, they had been just sort of stagnating, down year over year, not looking good. And sometime in August, you saw a big jump begin to happen. And now intermodal volumes are up year over year, and they've stayed up. And they've stayed up even in the seasonal period when it usually goes down. And so that's the one indicator. And then on the freight side, not to get too far into the weeds, but it's worth talking about this because these things really matter. The freight market has bottomed, and it's starting to firm up in terms of price again. That's a huge deal and something that people aren't talking about. And it's a huge change from what we've seen for the last 12 months plus. So when you talk about inflation and where are we starting from and what is going to be the situation 12 months from now, if you've been a company like Darden or anyone else, any consumer company, and your labor inflation has been, still high, but not getting worse, and all of your kind of food and energy inputs have been a huge bonus for you, and freight has been a huge bonus for you, and now all of those things are turning around, what is the starting point that now, core inflation is at 3.5%? That's your starting point for all of those cyclical things to be now moving in the opposite direction again. That's not where you want to be starting that cyclical process.
That would put you, though, in the camp of thinking of interest rates cuts this year, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're painting a picture of an economy that maybe is starting to turn, that maybe people are too complacent about it, and it's Goldilocks this, and you think that the problems might be more dire. But in that case, isn't your interest rate expectation then cuts, or am I reading you wrong?
No, it's the opposite. So I think the economy could prove to be stronger than people think, and that as a result of that, interest rates could stay where they are much longer than they think, or even not go down at all, and they could start talking about raising them again, depending on how far we get into this process before some of these things begin to flow through. And that's people are going to listen to that and think, what an idiot, because that's completely the opposite of what everyone else thinks. It's not too often I have a very diametrically opposed view from the consensus, but this is one of those moments.
Well, gosh, and can you just imagine the politics of even considering interest rate hikes as we hurtle into the election? I don't even want to think about how that's going to express itself politically in the United States. Before we sort of leave markets in general, but starting to segue more into the explicitly geopolitical, you mentioned when we were prepping for the podcast that China is basically the only thing on earth that has not rallied. It's been a tale of two cities with China literally for 12 months. It's been the treadmill to hell on the one hand, and yet they're not collapsing. They're not falling on their faces. They're still continuing to do piecemeal things to keep the economy going. They're not fixing any of their structural problems, but they're also not collapsing. And at least at the broad level, everything seems to be fine. PMI surprise, so Chinese production capacity for manufacturing or manufacturing performance did better than expected last month. But then at the same time, we have Xi Jinping with announcing a new bevy of purges at the top level, also appointing a naval man as defense minister, which is interesting in and of its own right with China. And then I'm also going to do something a little bit unfair because the media environment in China is obviously much more controlled than it is in the United States. But if you opened up the front page of the New York Times U.S. edition this morning, you would have seen feature articles on the resignation of the Harvard president and about things with Trump on the ballot and the lieutenant governor in Georgia and this, that, and the other thing. If you had opened up the South China Morning Post the last 2 days, you would have gotten headline stories on a new radiation treatment for cancer that Chinese scientists have discovered. have discovered, excuse me, the new catapult system they're putting on their new aircraft carrier that should be ready hopefully by next year, according to them. A new Eastern data plus Western computing initiative where they have noticed this inequality between computing capacity within the interior of China, which is still relatively poor, and the wealthy coastal portion. So they're pouring billions of dollars into some kind of initiative to try and bring computing power into the interior and, raise economic growth that way. And a new state-owned enterprise that combines 25 different entities to bring nuclear fusion to Chinese manufacturing processes and power infrastructure over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. Obviously, that's what China wants us to think. China wants everybody to think they are the glittering future of all technological solutions. And if you look underneath the hood, maybe those things are going to be a little bit more complicated. But that's what they're focusing on the front page. And that's what the U.S. is focusing on the front page, which when you start thinking about innovation and geopolitics and whose problems are serious enough that they don't have time to worry about the Harvard president and they have to do all these other things because if they don't, they're not going to have enough food and they're not going to have enough power. All of that makes me think that maybe folks are underestimating China. But as always, you will bring me back to earth and tell me about why Pettis is right and why China's not going to do all the things that I just said. So tell me why.
Oh, I think they will do the things you just said, for sure. I don't think that's in question. There's no question about their ability to invest. And they're very, very good at developing technologies. I mean, that's been the story of the last 30, 40 years, is deploying existing technologies, very aggressively and then developing new ones. The issue with China, and I think it's worth thinking about this in the context of warfare, because I think, so much of what we talk about when we talk about technology, and especially as we're preparing this innovation strategy, I've been reading a lot about the Second World War and going back there and just thinking about how nations, shape their investment into technologies for very specific state-driven reasons. And I think it's worth keeping that in the back of your mind when you think about China, because by definition, warfare is throwing your treasure down a hole for a reason that's not economic. Because when you build tanks and planes and missiles, you're not creating any economic goods with those things. They're literally used to destroy things. That's why you always get hyperinflation and debt explosions after big wars. And we probably couldn't sustain another big war like World War II. But it's worth using that, or at least thinking about that as an oblique comparison when you think about a lot of the things that China is doing, because they're throwing their treasure down a hole. China doesn't need fusion energy. I mean, yeah, they could use it. It would be great if they developed it. China doesn't need more high-speed rail. China doesn't need, a lot of the sort of technology-oriented things that you just listed right there. But that's what their system is set up to do. It's set up to confiscate the excess production of ordinary people and channel it into things like that. And the problem is when you run out of productive things like that to invest in, then you start throwing your treasure down a hole like you do as if it were wartime. So maybe China will, develop the equivalent of radar and nuclear weapons and jet technology and the things, 75 years ago that were on the cutting edge of new technology development, but it's not what they need right now in terms of rebalancing and finding a healthy way to proceed. And I'm a little disillusioned. I'm a little sad to read what's coming out of China in the last few months, because I was, as you know, pretty hopeful that Xi Jinping was sort of stealing himself and those around him to make some significant changes. And if you look at sort of the headlines, I mean, no one knows what the hell's going on there underneath the hood, and anyone who claims they do is lying. But if you just look at the headlines of what they're doing or saying they're doing, it looks to be quite the opposite. It looks to be sort of steady as she goes. We'll figure out the property issues, the debt issues later. Like, let's put up a 5% GDP growth target for this year. Like, we'll moderate it a little bit. Like, you're not seeing any evidence that the system is capable of reforming itself, which I guess is what we should have expected all along, even though I was hopeful that they could, because that's going to be a tougher transition than it would be otherwise when you look at the long term.
Well, and I think that's why the PLA purge is so important here, because a lot of what you just talked about and that optimism or that thesis playing out relies on Xi not worrying about political challenges to his power, not worried about corruption in the military. He's supposed to have already handled those things. If he wants to go after the structural problems, he can't also then be watching his back or worried about the PLA rocket forces and whether some new political faction is coming from him. I mean, there are, like, if you poke around sort of top tier Chinese universities and the reports that they're putting out in terms of economic outlook and recommendations, they're saying all the right things. There's one from Peking University that was released just recently that says the insufficient consumption of Chinese people is the crux of the current economic problem, and it lays out all the reasons that is the way that it is and ways that China should try and start to stimulate that, whether it's by getting wages higher or putting money, direct stimulus into the pockets of Chinese consumers. So ironic that in some ways, in the U.S. economy is doing better than maybe people thought because they underestimated the profligacy of U.S. consumers. And yet China, the one thing that China needs is the profligacy of Chinese consumers, and they just can't do it. They're not rising off the mat to buy things. I guess, as you would say, in part because of the structural issues, but a sort of bleak start to the year if China's talking about, as you said, all these boondoggle infrastructure investments and science investments that they have to do, and Xi Jinping worried about loyalty within the PLA itself, and yet still wages stagnant, no more Chinese consumption. We're still talking about the same stuff that we were even 12 months ago.
Yeah, it's no secret what they need to do. The professors at Peking University are not the ones who benefit from the current system. So they can come out and say, yeah, we got to change this, that, and the other thing. But, the local government officials who have entrenched themselves and gotten rich over the last 30 years, those are the guys who need to be coming out and saying those things, and they're not. And no one would expect them to, because it's not in their interest. So that's depressing, honestly.
Well, let's go from depressing to, I'm not going to say uplifting. I would push back against you on the nuclear fusion thing, because China does need energy, and it needs cleaner energy. It needs cheap and reliable and secure energy that also doesn't pollute the environment. But, you put that geopolitical issue on the table and then look at what's going on in the Red Sea with shipping disruptions and things like that. And China's not necessarily doing what you would expect. So the White House and a bunch of European countries and other U.S. allies put out a statement today warning the Houthis that, they would be held accountable for continuing to disrupt Red Sea shipping. Iran sent a destroyer into the Red Sea itself, made a big deal about that. We can talk about all the different things that are happening in the Red Sea in a second and set the table. But the segue there is just that China didn't sign the statement. And you would think that the one thing that China might be able to agree with all of these Western countries with is free and open shipping in the Middle East, because China's getting a lot of its energy from the Middle East. And I've been expecting China to have to become more politically involved in that part of the world. Maybe they can get enough from other places. Maybe they're getting it from Russia. And so maybe they don't feel as exposed there. Maybe their relationship with Iran is causing them not to want to sign on to that statement, but behind the scenes they're putting pressure on the Iranians. But I did think it was interesting that China was not a part of that White House statement.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because when we talk about geopolitical power and U.S. ascendancy, we always talk in sort of these general terms about the U.S. keeping open shipping lanes and enforcing the fluid flow of global trade. And for the first time in quite a while, you're literally getting a direct attack on that, or a direct threat to that. What do you make of the U.S.'s response? What do you make of, I saw a map from Bloomberg yesterday showing all the ships going around the Suez Canal. They're all going around the Cape of Good Hope. Doesn't seem like they're too eager to go through that crucial bottleneck. So is that Is that what is the U.S. doing in your take? And are they doing a good job? Like, are they fulfilling the role that we imagined that they would? In other words, geopolitically.
Yeah, and I think I'll answer that in just a second. I think the unappreciated countries that are losing from that scenario are also Egypt and Turkey. Egypt because it's losing now tolls from the Suez, and Turkey because if the Mediterranean becomes a place that is unsafe for shipping, suddenly Istanbul is not nearly as valuable as it usually is. And when you go back and look at the periods where things don't go well for Turkey, in part it's because Turkey's not strong enough to help police the Mediterranean and make it secure enough so it becomes this area where all these different world goods and things like that are traversing. So if you get companies that are willing, especially with crude at whatever it is. I think it was 72 when I woke up this morning. I haven't looked at how it's done in the market today. If oil's gonna be that cheap, okay. So it's not perfect, but you can go around the Cape of Good Hope and get your goods where you need to get, and you can put them on a schedule, eventually, so that it's not so much of a delay. So as we're talking about all this, I mean, very real concerns for Egypt and Turkey from those sort of broad structural ways. I'm a little confused about the U.S. response to this. And, in the last podcast that I did at the end of the year talking about that, one of the things I said was the only thing that seems to have happened over the last 6 to 8 weeks that it seems truly geopolitically significant to me is this Red Sea shipping issue. And I expected on December 22nd, which was the last podcast we did, I said, I'm expecting the U.S. to fix this by the time we come back to broadcasting, because that's what the U.S. Navy is supposed to do. That is the U.S. power calling card. And the U.S. has not done that. And I think there's a couple different things going on here. Remember, this all starts with the Israel-Hamas war in October. And Israel in and of itself is flashing disturbing signals to me. I've said from the beginning here that the Israeli state, its military power is significant relative to all of its neighbors, but Israel's still a really small country. It can't stay mobilized for a long period of time and not just have catastrophic impacts, not just on its economy, but on its culture, on its politics. And if you look and listen to what Israeli decision makers are talking about, they're talking about a long war that's going to go on for months or even years. They haven't gone after Hezbollah in Lebanon, but they assassinated a big Hamas guy in Lebanon over the past couple of days, and they keep on poking the bear there without doing anything. They're rotating troops in and out of the Gaza. I mean, you start to put it together, it looks like Israel is gearing up for some kind of longer-term operation or occupation of the Gaza Strip. Like, they don't look like they're afraid of escalation or of continuing along this path. The United States doesn't want that. Most Americans, if you look at polls, don't approve of how the Biden administration has given support to Israel in the context of the war. Now, I think Biden gets a little bit of an unfair rap here. Part of that is he's giving very intense public support, so behind the scenes he can tell the Israelis, hey, calm it down a little. I'm going to be with you in public, but you have to listen to me, and we can't have this broader conflagration. To the extent that the United States is pulling the USS Gerald Ford out of the region, that was that second aircraft carrier that they deployed in October to the region. They're pulling it out, even as Iran is putting destroyers in, and even as the Houthis are blowing up ships, and shipping companies are saying we're not going to do the Red Sea anymore. So you put all of that together. I mean, the United States is, releasing this joint statement. It does have this joint task force. The Gerald Ford is leaving, but you've got 3 other ships, including the USS Bataan, which are coming in, and which are, you put that in combination with what the U.S. usually has in the region, the aircraft carrier that's there, all the forces at Bahrain. Maybe that's enough to open up shipping, but it's just not happening. The U.S. isn't going for it. And I was also struck by a former U.S. admiral named James Stavridis. I've mentioned him on the podcast before because he wrote or helped co-write a great book called 2034. It's an imagination of basically what the next world war looks like, and it's gotten a lot of acclaim for how realistic it is. He was in the U.S. Navy for a long time, worked really hard to try and present a plausible scenario about what a war in the year 2034 could look like. And I was sort of shocked because he had a Bloomberg op-ed that published today that said the United States should change its rules of engagement in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, that it should attack Houthi infrastructure and military capability inside of Yemen, and failing that, should attack Iran directly, Iranian military assets directly, because Iran is who is supporting this. He also, in a separate article, said that he thought the chance of war with a regional war was going up from 15 to 30%, so still relatively low, but doubling the likelihood that he thought this was going to go up. As a side note, I know he's associated with the Carlyle Group and doing a lot of other things. I don't know how you become a public figure where, when a former U.S. admiral says that, you're literally shaping perception there, but then you're also sort of advising on, like, that's a really difficult place to be, I must say. But in the last thing I'll just say about that is that in one of his op-eds, he talked about how this happened in 1988, where, there was the USS Samuel Roberts was hit by Iran, and it was called Operation Praying Mantis. The United States blew up a couple of Iranian ships, and that was the end of the issue there. And the U.S. has not decided to do that yet. And I don't exactly understand why. Maybe it's Biden is trigger shy. Maybe he's trying to avoid the regional war. But it seems pretty clear cut to me. If you have proxy militants that are running out around the Red Sea and blowing up ships to the extent that shipping companies are just going to avoid the Red Sea altogether, well, what is the point of all the aircraft carriers and the U.S. naval power and things like that if you can't open the sea lanes? And at least, as we're recording here, Thursday, January 4th, 2:11 p.m. Eastern time, the United States, like, the bark is loud, but the bite, it's not there. It's the inverse Teddy Roosevelt. They're speaking loudly and carrying a soft stick, and that doesn't make sense from straight geopolitics. Straight geopolitics says this is relatively straightforward. You have a non-state actor that is disrupting a sea lane through which 15% roughly of global, I forget if it's total trade or energy trade, but 15%, a big figure. You should take out the big stick for this. It's not, most Americans would support that, especially if you want to keep those inflation numbers down. So you can probably hear the ambivalence in my voice. I'm confused with what the White House thinks it's doing right this second.
Yeah, it's a little bit concerning, just thinking about, what you're saying about the regional risks of war, but also, with regard to the Israeli kind of intention to fight a protracted conflict, because to the extent this becomes more widespread, and I just mean conflict and sort of the loss of conflict, the loss of people and materials and time and attention, like, that is going to squeeze inflation, not to bring this all to economic terms and lose the human side of it, but it is going to squeeze inflation higher, all else equal. And we're in sort of the unique position of starting that period where debt is already very, very high across most of the developed world, and in China in particular, Japan, I mean, you name it. If you start going into a period where all of a sudden you have sort of a little bit of chaos here, a little bit of conflict there, smaller nations begin ramping up their spending, it's just a recipe for, it's not a good recipe for people who own wealth, in other words, that isn't in non-paper form of various kinds, let's just say.
Well, and not to pile on here, but I think the other thing that is happening, and this is not getting headlines because nobody cares about sub-Saharan Africa, but on the other side of the Red Sea is sitting Ethiopia, which has been a sort of basket case in and of itself. While we were away, defaulted on a I believe it was $1 billion Euro bond payment, so they're the third African nation in 3 years to default. But they also said that they have a deal now with Somaliland, which is I guess an unapproved offshoot of Somalia. How you can be an offshoot of a basically failed state, I don't know. But okay, like, most of the world recognizes Somalia as a nation, even if it's a failed one, and does not recognize Somaliland. But apparently Ethiopia has this deal where they're going to recognize Somaliland as independent, and they're going to offer, you can't make this up, they're going to offer shares in Ethiopian Airways or something like that to Somaliland in return for leasing territory that allows Ethiopia to have access to the Red Sea and not be landlocked anymore. And as you can imagine, Somalia is furious about this. It doesn't want Somaliland to be able to take Somaliland and lease it to the Ethiopians and things like that. But, and Ethiopia also has, it's not quite civil war level right now, but they've gotten rid of the Tigray conflict, but they still have conflicts specifically with in the Amhara region, but in other parts of the country as well. So, I mean, and that's before we even get to Eritrea and which side is Eritrea on and what are they doing. So it's almost a shit sandwich, if you will, right there with the Red Sea. Now, does that spill over into shipping? Oh, probably not. But if I had a shipping company executive in front of me here, I'd probably be pointing to every single red dot on the map in the region and being like, if you can get around the Cape of Good Hope and oil's at 70, like if you want a lower risk, like, that's the way to do it, because there's way too many things happening in this part of the world to be comfortable before we even get into, Iran and the US and all those other things. So.
And what do you make, I mean, I guess if you were to paint a picture just across a broad swath of all sub-Saharan Africa from Somalia to, just east of Nigeria, things have been getting worse. What is your outlook on that general region, to the extent that you can generalize about it? What are the interconnections between that and the things that show up on the front page of the newspaper and not on page 6, I guess, that you would alert people to?
Well, this is another one of the reasons why I am so confused by the inflation conversation, because in these parts of the world, inflation is still a very real thing, and prices are still going up in a meaningful way. Nigeria has its worst. Now, Nigeria is going through this because the president is trying to push through reforms in the same way that Argentina is. So things have to get worse before they get better. So, a tip of the cap to him for trying to do something that is probably impossible. But in the here and now, across most of sub-Saharan Africa, you have rising food prices and rising energy prices and insecurity. And that is what led to that spate of coups and things like that across the Sahel. And it's not like just because it was January 1st, 2024, it's not like things have changed. Like, that process is also continuing. I'm having a guest on the podcast literally tomorrow. His name's Ben Shepard. We'll publish the episode next week. He's an expert on the Democratic Republic of Congo, something you and I have been talking about for a long time here, in which I'm not a deep expert on, but we're going to talk to him about the contested elections in the DRC and all the violence that has been happening in the DRC. So much of it's over 70% of the world's cobalt is being mined from the DRC, and that's before you get to copper and everything else like that. Also, before, if you go back to Cold War history, there was a very real chance that before Vietnam became the place where the United States made its ill-advised stand against global communism, and ill-advised for a lot of different reasons we can go into some other time. The Congo was another place where that was happening, where you had the Soviets backing one side and the Americans backing one side, and maybe there was going to be some kind of war there too. And that's also before we get to the Wagner Group and China and competition in sub-Saharan Africa in general. So I don't know. It's pretty difficult to be optimistic in any meaningful way about Africa. We can talk maybe about long-term demographics, and that's where population growth is happening and urbanization is happening, and people want nicer food and nicer things. Yeah, that's all cool, but from a political security standpoint, from a migration standpoint, like, it just looks terrible along all those different ends. And that's not just. I hate painting with too broad a brush. Like, we can go region by region in Africa, whether it's the Horn, whether it's the Sahel, whether it's Central Africa, whether it's West Africa, whether it's Southern Africa. I mean, no parts of it are looking particularly good right now. And yet the Ethiopians are telling you that if you want to invest in Ethiopian bonds and Ethiopian banks, they would like that foreign investment. Ignore the default, according to them.
Man, you have to be pretty desperate to take shares in Ethiopian Airlines in exchange for anything.
Yeah, I thought
maybe
that was
a cup of coffee.
Just trying to get some Red Sea beachfront property, apparently, is what that goes for nowadays.
The one thing that I have been thinking about a lot on this front is we're in a different environment, I think. And for most of our lifetimes, at least, I feel like a lot of people in the US and Europe, the developed worlds, will read about these things in the newspaper. Oh, war in Sudan, civil war in Ethiopia, chaos in the eastern parts of Nigeria. And it's sort of like, there's sort of this, oh, that's too bad, but then turn the page and whatever, it doesn't impact us at all. And I think the environment now is different, particularly on the food side, right? Because this is something, just as analysts, I think this is a blind spot that we tend to have. When we analyze food markets, the people who are ag analysts, they're farmers, or they're connected with farmers, and primarily export-oriented farmers. So the people who analyze these things live in the breadbasket of the US, they live in Australia or France or Ukraine. But the food market is so driven, like, we're always thinking about supply, and specifically supply in those exporting countries. But the amount of food consumed And the amount of supply that's domestically consumed and not traded at all, so everyone just ignores it, is way, way bigger. And in all of these nations where human beings live, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is like, if you think Sudan doesn't matter for you because you live in New Jersey, like everyone in Sudan needs to eat something. And if you're not able to produce your own food, it doesn't matter what your income is or how quote unquote important you are. If you can't produce your own food to eat, you got to get that food from somewhere, or someone's going to give it to you, whether, the World Food Program or whatever it is. So the biggest producer of wheat by far in the world is China, by like 5 times more than, more than Russia or Ukraine, the big guys that we usually think about. And that's a shocking statistic, but no one knows because China eats all of its own wheat. They don't trade it abroad. So if you get these highly populous countries where there's havoc, that's really problematic for food prices. And you can see this, like rice prices have been going up a lot. They've been really zigging while everything else is zagging. And that's a big tell because you get substitution between rice and wheat, for example. So tying this back to, the person in New Jersey and tying it back specifically to the Olive Garden, your all-you-can-eat breadsticks do depend on what's happening in these places because they really do reverberate in a way that during a more stable time, you could just ignore.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't any less depressing than our previous topic. I think
oh my God, I'm dying here. Can we?
Well, just
We'll
think
start
about
the new year with something good.
Think about how somebody in Sudan feels. You're out here complaining about how much the baguettes cost in Paris right now. But no, I mean, I think we're close to reining in the end of the podcast. But just to say, and we Simtac is already budgeted to come on next week also to talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. But when we talk about the Red Sea and Israel and things like that, that is the other bookend here, which is that the Russia-Ukraine war, at no point has it been as bad as everybody thought it was going to be. And now it really has reached a dangerous inflection point for Ukraine because the counteroffensive failed. The combination of Israel and political cycles means there's less ammunition, less political support for Ukraine to defend itself as well. Within Ukraine, we're starting to see the strains of what war looks like. Is Zelensky even going to be the leader of Ukraine by the end of the year? I hear people who are well more plugged in than I am saying there's no way possible. And you can see the cleavages that have already happened between the Ukrainian defense forces and between Zelensky and the things that they're saying about the conflict. And that's not to say that things are great for Russia either, but it does feel like we've reached this grinded out war of attrition phase for Russia. And as we've said here before, Russia's sort of goal has been to outsuffer everybody else in the conflict. And maybe we are headed towards some kind of scenario where Putin is still around. Like the other metaphor, or not a metaphor, the other piece of history that I've often been alluding to is, Tsar Nicholas II got his teeth kicked in by the Japanese in 1904, 1905. He was Tsar for another 10, 12 years before you got the Russian Revolution, and we had World War I and everything else in between. So maybe Russia goes back to being a country that is not just mired in a war in Ukraine, but is starting to push around in other ways around the world too. So, I mean, like I said, we'll do a longer piece on Russia-Ukraine with Sim specifically, but that is also not a particularly rosy thing in the context of where things are happening globally from a geopolitical perspective.
Anything positive we can close out on?
It's hard to be positive with, yes, there always is, because our longer term perspective, and that's that 2 to 5 year horizon perspective, I am still pretty optimistic about. But it is very hard to get to any optimistic place with the level of volatility and instability that there is in the Middle East right now. I have not, we have a couple clients who've been following us who have been asking for, let me know when the all clear on the risk of a broader regional war in the Middle East is there. And I haven't been able to sound it. And if anything, I'm getting more concerned the longer that this goes on that we are going to get something that is going to drag into some kind of regional conflict. So we could talk about all of our multipolarity and innovation and tech change and all these other things, but while this Middle East uncertainty is hanging over our heads, it really is hard to be optimistic about kind of where we're going here over the next month or two. And maybe that White House statement today is the first sign of the U.S. deciding enough is enough. We're going to open these shipping lanes, and we're going to tell the Israelis that they have to back off, and we're going to assert ourselves. The scarier bit is, what if the U.S. does all that and it doesn't work? What if everybody calls the U.S. bluff? Or what if U.S. power isn't what it once was? What if Operation Praying Mantis worked in 1988, but it's not 1988 anymore, and the same move isn't going to work? So if there's doom and gloom, it's because, like I said, I was expecting this to be resolved by now, or at least for the United States to be communicating a strategy or a step forward for how we wouldn't be talking about the Middle East and we'd be talking about other things. And we're not talking about other things. We're talking about what's going on in the Middle East, and that's never a good thing. So, yes.
No.
So no, I guess not. But maybe we'll save the optimism for last week. You also, Rob, denied the listeners an Oliver Cromwell reference. So if you've been playing the drinking game and drinking when Rob mentions Cromwell, there you go. 50 minutes in, I saved you. You can have a shot of the whiskey now. Rob, I'll see you next week, and it'll be a little more lighthearted, hopefully.
All right. See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor.